The first sound wasn't applause, it was glass shattering on tile. A coffee mug slipped from someone's hand when my father's words cut the air. She's never been anything but a failure. The sentence didn't rise, it dropped, heavy enough that the whole VFW hall seemed to bow under it. Every head turned. The ceiling fans kept their lazy spin. The smell of fried chicken from the buffet table suddenly felt out of place, like laughter at a funeral. I stood near the back row of bleachers, hands still at my sides, as if staying still could make the impact softer. It didn't. Franklin Quinn, my father, knew how to command silence. 30 years wearing a badge will teach you that. Tonight he used it not for order, not for dignity, but for spectacle. His chest rose, chin set, like a sheriff still convinced the town needed him to narrate truth from fiction. And for the second act of his performance, he clapped one weathered hand on the shoulder of a man beside him. Broad shoulders, regulation haircut, the kind of bearing you notice before you know the name. Now this, my father declared, warmth in his tone now that it wasn't pointed at me. This is service, a ranger, a man who understands sacrifice. The applause came scattered but obedient. People clap when they're told who to respect. I should have looked away, should have taken the hit, let the night swallow it. But the ranger's eyes found mine. For a breath his expression held confidence, easy and unshaken. Then it faltered, his mouth parted, jaw trembling, color draining as recognition set in. "Ma'am," his voice cracked once, then steadied. "Are you the night weaver?" The phrase carried like smoke in a drafty room. Conversations thinned to threads and snapped. A veteran by the coffee urn stiffened. A teenager lowered his phone without realizing. My father's proud smirk stuttered, confusion flickering where certainty used to live. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Rumors don't require confirmation. They feed on the silence that follows. And this silence roared. The ranger swallowed hard, squared his shoulders, and raised his voice so even the back row couldn't pretend to miss it. "Permission to breathe, ma'am." I let the smallest smile touch the corner of my mouth. Permission granted. Air rushed back into the room like surfacing after too long underwater. The ranger nodded once, as if he'd been waiting years to say it out loud. My father tried to laugh it off. "I'm sure she's very good at spreadsheets," he said, the kind of throwaway line that usually wins nervous chuckles. None came, not this time. The floor shifted under us all, not literally, but you could feel it, like respect putting down weight where it had been missing. A boy in the second row whispered to his dad, "She's real." His father just nodded, eyes locked on me. I stepped forward until I could see the exits, the flag above the stage, and our reflection in the glass case of old trophies. "It's just a name," I said finally, voice calm. "Names weigh less than work." A Vietnam vet near the back leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Which teams?" he asked, though the answer didn't matter. "Enough," the ranger cut in, eyes still on me, long enough to know she hears the pattern before the rest of us. The word hung pattern. You could feel the room catching it, trying it on like a jacket they hadn't known they owned. My father folded his arms, fortress pose. "I know the difference between a story and a life," he muttered. I met his stare, even, steady. "I'm standing right here, you can choose to see me." No raised voices, no list of operations, just a fact placed like a coin on the counter. The kind that changes transactions. "Mrs. Delaney, who runs the elementary school and has patched more scraped knees than any medic I've ever known," reached for the mic, then set it back down. She understood this was a night the room had to teach itself how to stand. One by one, it did. Not dramatic, not choreographed. Just people finding their feet when truth finally demanded posture. And that's how it began. The night a room leaned away from the man who had claimed authority, and toward the woman he thought he could dismiss. The night Harvest Ridge heard the name Night Weaver, and finally understood what silence had been trying to tell them all along. People like to think the cracks start in some grand moment. Truth is, they start smaller. In my house, they started on linoleum. I was 8 when my father lined my heels together in the kitchen, the smell of burnt coffee and gun oil rising off him like a second skin. He pushed my shoulders back until they pinched, tilted my chin up with 2 fingers and said, "Don't blink. The world respects a straight back." That was the first lesson. Not how to ride a bike, not how to throw a ball. Stand straight, don't blink. That was childhood inside the Quinn house. Discipline wasn't decoration, it was oxygen. Shirts had to crease sharp enough to cut. Shoes angled at 45 degrees under the bed. Morning runs before the sun rose over Harvest Ridge, his voice barking cadence to a child half his size. The town adored him for it. Sheriff Quinn, they'd say, nodding at the grocery store. He never had to pay for pie at the diner. They loved the myth. They didn't have to live with the man. Mom, Elise, played a quieter game. She worked at the library. Her love smelled like pencil shavings and paperbacks. She'd slip folded poems into my lunch bag, Frost or Dickinson, talismans against the storm we both knew waited at home. She never fought him head on. She just waited storms out like she knew some thunder only answers to time. At 12, he took me to the Air Force Academy vs Army game. The stadium shook with brass bands and cadets in long coats marching like chess pieces. I cheered when the Falcons scored. He didn't even turn his head. "Leave those colors to men who can carry them," he said. His eyes never left the field. I pretended I didn't hear. Pretending became practice. By 15, I knew every medal in his shadow box. Knew how to iron a uniform sleeve until it snapped when you bent it. Knew the difference between yes, sir, spoken with respect, and yes, sir, spoken to keep the peace. What he didn't know, what he refused to believe, was that I wanted in. Not his badge, not his precinct, my own road, the Air Force. The night I told him, he didn't yell. That would have been easier. He just went still, eyes on the mail in his hand. "You don't have the Constitution." He didn't mean stamina, he meant gender. His silence after that weighed more than any insult. Dinner eaten with forks scratching plates, news playing too loud at 7, lights out at 10. Whole weeks where my victories, a track meet and in chemistry, earned nothing but a grunt. It was Mom who broke the blockade. She drove me 2 towns over to a recruiter's office, parking 2 blocks away so no one in Harvest Ridge would see her car. While I filled out forms, she graded papers in the front seat. When I came back, she didn't ask what he'd say. She asked what I wanted most. A fair fight, I told her. She tapped the steering wheel. Then train for unfair weather. Senior year, I wrote my academy essay at the kitchen table after midnight. The whole house asleep, the clock over the stove ticking like a metronome. I wrote about cadence at dawn, about finding order in places that called you too much, about wanting to earn space no one could take back. When the thin envelope came first, I hid it. When the thick one arrived in March, I pressed it to my chest until the cold sank through the paper. Then I carried it into his study. He slid it with his letter opener. "Read the first line, 'We are pleased to offer,' and folded it without expression. "So you're serious," he said, not a question. He set it down and turned back to his ledger. "We'll discuss later." We didn't. The night of graduation, my friends strung white lights in the backyard. There was lemonade and laughter. He didn't show. Around 9, I saw his sedan roll past, not stopping. It felt like being saluted and dismissed at the same time. The morning I left for Colorado, Mom tucked 3 envelopes into my duffel. "Open when you're lonely. Open when you're hurt. Open when you forget who you are." She hugged me hard at the bus station, then stepped back, inspecting me like before the first day of school. "Stand up straight," she said, and for the first time it was a joke between us. My father had an appointment to get the tires rotated. On the bus, a boy with a buzz cut asked if I was nervous. I told him nerves were a compass. You just had to read them right. Out the window, Harvest Ridge slid past, the diner with its lemon pies, the courthouse flag too big for the pole. Each mile closer to the mountains felt like a mile closer to oxygen. I wasn't running from him. I was running toward the only argument that ever made sense in our house: earn it. That summer at the academy, I learned exhaustion folds neatly into a pocket if you teach it to. Learned that order isn't noise, it's space opening where doubt used to sit. And every time my back ached from the weight of it, I remembered the kitchen linoleum, his hand pressing my shoulders square. He thought he was building a soldier who would salute his authority. What he built, without meaning to, was a spine stiff enough to stand against him. That's where the cracks began. Not in the VFW hall, not with the Ranger's whisper, but years earlier in a kitchen that smelled like coffee and polish, where silence taught me how to stand straighter than the man who demanded it. Colorado broke me down before it built me back. At the academy, mornings started before light. Frosted breath hanging over the yard, boots hammering pavement, lungs stinging like punishment. You learned quick, volume didn't win, precision did. And if you couldn't fold exhaustion into a pocket, you wouldn't last long enough to even imagine wings on your chest. 4 years of that rhythm burned something permanent into me. So when my orders came, Hurlburt Field, Air Force Special Operations Command, I already understood one truth. The map is never finished. You sketch, you redraw, you adapt, or you get erased. I wasn't a pilot, wasn't pararescue, wasn't a door kicker. I was something else. Operations and intelligence. The person in the corner room with too much caffeine and a wall full of clocks, deciding which door got kicked and when. The first time I set foot in the ops trailer, the Florida air stuck like syrup to my skin. Radios cracked static. Screens flickered with maps that looked less like geography and more like pulse charts, routes, times, shadows. Men twice my size drifted in and out, checking gear, laughing in the language of people who know what real nights cost. They called me ma'am at first, like they were testing the word to see if it fit. I learned fast that respect doesn't rise from titles. It seeps in when your plan holds, even when the weather doesn't. Our first mission together was no war story, no Hollywood firefight. It was a search and rescue after a Pacific storm rolled ugly. 2 helos, 3 pararescue jumpers, 1 ranger detachment riding backup because the currents were chewing boats like paper. My job, thread them through the dark without losing anyone. The weather made liars out of satellites. Wind sheared in unpredictable angles, and the generator at a coastal relay hiccuped like a drunk. If you froze, men died. If you overcorrected, same result. I remember leaning over the console, tracing 3 routes on laminated map plastic, grease pencil smudging my fingers. Route A was shortest but already flooded. Route B looked fine on paper but required comms we didn't fully trust. Route C, what I called barn, was longer, jagged, messy. I'd only drawn it because I'd noticed one stubborn neon sign on a diner corner flicker out of rhythm every 30 seconds. That delay meant trucks slowed there every time without fail. So when the main convoy stalled early, too far north, I shifted them. Take barn, I said into the mic, voice calm, clipped. Use the diner as your pivot. They listened. They didn't argue. And 10 minutes later, the pararescue team pulled 3 fishermen alive from water black as diesel, while the ranger detachment secured the pier without a shot fired. Back at base, the men peeled off gear, water dripping on the concrete. Nobody made speeches. They didn't have to. One ranger, young, jaw tight, walked past my desk, paused, then leaned closer. His voice was barely a whisper. How did you know? I kept my eyes on the map. I didn't, I just knew what could. He nodded once like a student filing away a lesson. His name was Miles Rivera. He'd carry that night with him the way soldiers do, quietly, like a pocket knife you don't show but always keep sharp. They didn't start calling me Night Weaver that night. Not yet. But that's when I began to hear it, men knocking their knuckles twice on my table before stepping out, half superstition, half respect. As if I was spinning something invisible around them. A web they trusted not to break. The truth, I wasn't a legend. I wasn't a savior. I was a woman with maps, radios, and nerves steady enough to listen for the hum beneath the noise. That night, walking back alone under the thick Florida dark, I felt it for the first time. Not pride. Not relief. Something else. Edges. The edge of maps, the edge of respect, the edge of a name not yet spoken. And I knew sooner or later someone was going to say it out loud. Nicknames don't come with ceremony. They slip in sideways, stick like burrs, and before you know it, they're written on walls you didn't sign. Mine started in the desert. The heat out there didn't just bake your skin, it bleached the color out of the world. We were running shoot-house drills on an abandoned compound, walls pocked with old bullet scars, air vibrating with the weight of sun. The teams moved like one animal, clearing corners, shouting calls that rattled off the stone. I wasn't supposed to be in the stack. My job was on the tailgate, map across my knees, headset pressed to one ear. Watching angles, writing down where eyes went when stress spiked, catching patterns before they got men killed later. That day I drew arcs on the map, layered, overlapping circles around a target site. A web, thick where danger clustered, thin where time stretched. A chief leaned over, sweat dripping off his jawline. He squinted at my lines. You like webs? He asked. Smirking. Webs catch what runs, I said. He didn't laugh, he just nodded, slow, like he'd heard more truth than he'd expected. That night when the team debriefed, someone drew a crude spider on the corner of the whiteboard. They left it there. It stayed through the next rotation. Men started knocking their knuckles twice on my desk before heading out. Little rituals, half joke, half insurance policy. That's how it begins, quiet, almost invisible. The first time it really caught fire was months later, forward deployed. The city smelled like diesel and dust, radios coughing static in a room lit by one flickering strip light. There was a bomb maker moving like smoke through the streets, burning lives with every fuse he touched. We'd mapped him for weeks, where he bought cigarettes, which alleys he cut through when the heat got close. The plan was tight, but plans lie. That night, the lead truck stalled 2 blocks early. A helmet light failed. A dog we hadn't accounted for barked at the wrong second. A dozen small things stacking into one big collapse. I heard it in the voices first. The pitch shift half a tone high, men trying not to sound like they knew the ground had tilted. I caught the hum and the pattern, the way water sings before it breaks a dam. Hold 2, I said. My voice had to be calm because panic spreads faster than fire. Pivot, 3 windows instead of door 4. Move now. They moved. Minutes later, the bomb maker walked straight into the net. No gunfire. No hero shots. Just wrists zip-tied behind his back, eyes wide like he'd seen a ghost. Back at the room, sweat still cutting tracks through dirt, the chief peeled off his gloves, looked at my map and said, "She spun that web and he never saw the silk." The younger ones laughed. Someone sharpied another spider on the wall, this time with an hourglass painted red. And that was it. Black Widow for the Navy girl in Air Force blues. Night Weaver for the ones who'd heard me listen through the noise. I never used the name myself, didn't need to. But when men twice my size started tapping the table before a mission, when they began asking, "What's the weave on this one?" That's when I knew the nickname had a life of its own. It wasn't about kills. It wasn't about glory. It was about sensing when the air changed, when silence got heavy, when the wrong door creaked before the hinges gave. It was about keeping men alive. Later I heard someone say it in a chow line, not loud, not boasting, just a whisper passed like currency. "She's the Night Weaver." The guy he said it to didn't laugh. He just nodded and knocked his knuckles twice on the table before taking his tray. That's how you know a name has weight. It doesn't need your approval. It walks ahead of you, clearing rooms you haven't entered yet. And in that wait, I understood something my father never had. Respect isn't loud. It's not inherited. It doesn't announce itself. Respect hums, quiet, constant, like a web stretched tight, waiting for the tremor. Loss doesn't slam the door. It leaks in under it. The call came while I was thousands of miles from Harvest Ridge. My mother's voice had grown thin in emails, but I'd let myself believe distance was exaggerating it. The word arrived one night between rotations, spoken soft by a medic reading from a screen biopsy. I called from a stairwell, Bahrain heat clinging like a wet shirt. Mom's voice was steady as ever. "Do your job," she said. "I'll do mine." I carried that steadiness back into the ops room. Radios popping static, checklists taped to walls, men laughing before wheels up because laughter oils the gears of courage. But her voice sat in my pocket, folded like one of the poems she used to hide in my lunch bag. By the time hospice called, I was already wheels up again. I read Frost and Mary Oliver at her bedside until her breaths came in tides. Her hand, once ink-stained from grading papers, felt like thin glass. Her last words to me were almost a joke. "Keep flying, not away, just up." Then the tide went out and didn't return. The funeral smelled like lemons because her car had always carried that scent. My father spoke first, stiff-clipped, stapling the program as if paper could armor him. I spoke second. I kept it plain, her mercy, her patience. The way she slipped books into my hands like smuggled contraband. My father never looked up. Back on base, grief didn't wait politely. It crawled into corners, made itself a roommate. And I had a choice, let it hollow me or turn it into something that held weight. That's when I began rewriting the checklists, not the ones about gear or timing, we had those. I wrote the ones no one wanted to admit mattered, a box for who calls home if it goes sideways. A line for air check inside, not just outside. Some of the old guards scoffed, called it soft. I didn't argue, I just tracked the numbers. Fewer near misses, fewer injuries. More nights where everyone came home with all their fingers and the worst souvenir was sand in their boots. A chief named Torres, who once sneered at my mental health nonsense, started running the check-ins himself after a kid he'd mentored admitted, shaking, that he hadn't wanted to wake up. That kid's still breathing. Torres doesn't sneer anymore. The men started calling it Widow's Church. Half joke, half thank you. Everyone knocks twice on the table before briefs now. Everyone asks, "How's your air?" in chow lines and waits for an answer. Grief became policy, and the strangest thing, respect followed. Cards showed up on my desk at Christmas. One read, "Your web kept me breathing this year." Not signed, didn't need to be. One afternoon, sitting on a tailgate with a map spread across my knees, I added one more line to every plan, soft fail where you can see it. A soldier leaned over, puzzled. "Why soft fail?" "Because it saves you from the hard one," I said. He grunted like he'd pocketed the thought for later, and I realized that was the closest thing to applause I'd ever want. Respect doesn't always come loud. Sometimes it comes in a ritual, a card left unsigned, or a line on a checklist that no one makes fun of anymore. I didn't need my father to see it. The teams did. That was enough. Harvest Ridge's VFW Hall had always been his ground. My father's. Franklin Quinn could stand under those buzzing lights, clear his throat, and men twice my age would lean forward like recruits at inspection. That night he tried the same trick. He put his hand on a ranger's shoulder, lifted his chin, and spoke the line he'd been rehearsing for years. She never amounted to much. The crowd gave him silence, the obedient kind, until Miles Rivera opened his mouth. "Ma'am," he said, voice cracking once before finding steel, "are you the Night Weaver?" It was as if the ceiling fan stopped. The word carried Night Weaver, and suddenly the room wasn't listening to my father anymore. All eyes pivoted, chairs shifted, respect recalculated itself in real time. My father's smirk stumbled. He searched the crowd like someone realizing the script had been swapped. I didn't answer. I let the silence work. Rumors don't need confirmation, they need air. Miles took that breath for me, louder this time for the whole hall. "Permission to breathe, ma'am." "Permission granted," I said, steady, measured. Something ancient moved then. A Vietnam vet by the coffee urn straightened his back. A woman who'd worn a different uniform in a different war folded her fan and stood. Even the 12-year-old boy in the second row whispered, "She's real," as if I'd stepped out of a story he'd only half believed. My father tried to drag the night back. "Well," he said, forcing a chuckle, "I'm sure she's very good at spreadsheets." It was the kind of throwaway jab that usually won nervous laughter. None came, not this time. The air thickened. Respect is heavy when it decides to sit down. The metal bleachers groaned, not from weight but from memory, like even aluminum knew which way the room had tilted. Miles pressed on. His voice carried the way only truth can. "We came home from Alder Key because she heard it before we did. She spun the net. We walked out alive." He didn't fill the blanks. Men who have walked back into fluorescent light carrying pieces they didn't count on no better than to decorate survival. I stepped forward enough to see the flag, the exits, and our reflection caught in the glass case of dusty trophies. "Respect isn't inherited," I said. "It's earned. Sometimes where no one sees." No one moved. Then a man in a ball cap lifted his hand to his heart. A woman stood straighter, jaw tight, eyes shining. One by one, the room found its feet. Not saluting, not ordered. Just standing, because sometimes the only right answer to truth is posture. The noise of small things, forks against plates, the squeak of sneakers, faded under the sound of bodies remembering they could rise. Mrs. Delaney, who'd bandaged half this town's knees, reached for the mic, thought better, and set it down. She knew the room had its own gravity now. My father stayed planted near the stage, arms crossed, fortress pose. But he looked smaller inside his jacket, as if the air had shifted density and he hadn't trained for it. He glanced at me, then at the ranger, then at the flag again. His eyes blinked too fast, like a man trying to read a map that no longer matched the terrain. I didn't list missions, didn't recount names or medals. I just stood, the same way he taught me on kitchen linoleum decades earlier, straight back, chin up, not blinking. Only this time, I wasn't standing for him. I was standing against the silence he'd built around me. The room rose, the bleachers sighed. And for the first time in Harvest Ridge, my father's voice wasn't the one holding the floor. The morning after the hall felt like waking in a town that had edited itself overnight. The paper still landed on porches with a thump, the diner still fried bacon that bled through its doors, and the flag over the courthouse still leaned a little too big for the pole. But Harvest Ridge had shifted weight. People nodded at me on Main Street, not with gossip, but with recognition. The air was quieter, but fuller. I parked in front of my father's house just after sunrise. The paint on the porch rails peeled the same way it had when I was 17. My palm remembered every splinter. He opened the door before I knocked, as if he'd been standing just inside, rehearsing what to say. His mouth started a sentence, then quit halfway. "Coffee?" he asked finally, defaulting to ritual. "Yes," I said, defaulting to mercy. We sat at the old kitchen table, the same one where he'd lined my heels together decades ago. His mug steamed between his hands like a prop he didn't trust to set down. I kept my palms flat on the wood, empty, visible. The varnish still bubbled in one corner from the time I set a pot down too hot. He'd lectured me an hour for that burn. Now his fingers traced it absently, as if scars on furniture were easier to touch than the ones between us. He cleared his throat. "If what they said last night, if any of it is true—" "It is," I said. He nodded once, like a man taking inventory. Then softer, "Why didn't you tell me?" I let silence stretch because silence had always been his weapon. It felt right to use it carefully, like turning a blade back on its owner. "Because you never asked," I said finally, then kinder, "because I couldn't." His mouth tightened, then loosened like geometry shifting. "I wanted," he stopped. "I expected." The words fell apart between us. For once, he didn't patch them with authority. He just sat there, a man out of practice with his own language. I leaned back, steady. Names get heavy. I picked up a different kind of weight. He studied me, fairness creeping back into his eyes, the same fairness that once made him a good cop before pride calcified it. He exhaled slow. "They called you," he trailed off, embarrassed by the grandeur. "It's just a handle," I said. "What matters is what you lift with it." His gaze dropped to the table. "Did you ever want me there?" "Only if you could stand," I answered. "Not for me, for yourself." We didn't trade apologies. We weren't built for quick repairs. But something shifted, fragile as glass and just as real. He sat straighter, shoulders dropping a quarter inch. For the first time, he wasn't performing a role. He was just a man tired, trying to read a new map. When I stood, rinsed my mug, and set it upside down to dry, he cleared his throat. "Proud," he said, one word naked, then quieter, even when I didn't know how. I didn't cry, I nodded. "Do the knowing now," I said, and stepped into the light. On the drive back, Harvest Ridge looked unchanged. Same bleachers, same diner, same crooked flag. But I carried something new, proof that silence can bend. Proof that even men made of stone can find a crack if you wait long enough. The truce wasn't a treaty. It wasn't peace. But it was a start. And sometimes a start is all you need to redraw the map. Respect doesn't arrive with trumpets. It arrives in rooms that decide quietly to stand taller. Weeks after Harvest Ridge tilted on its axis, I stood in a briefing room 2,000 miles away. Fluorescent lights hummed, the projector whined, and a dozen officers waited for a deck of slides that never came. I brought one page, 3 words in block letters. "Respect is logistics." They laughed at first, the polite kind. Then the room went quiet, listening. I told them the truth I'd earned in sand, sweat, and silence. Plan for dignity and watch what doesn't break. A young lieutenant wrote it on her palm like a cheat sheet. Later she taped it inside her locker beside a photo of her mother with a wrench. Weeks after that, I heard she'd started knocking twice on the doorframe before briefs, a ritual passed down without my name attached. That's how legacies work best, anonymous, living, carried. Miles Rivera visited once on his way through. He brought pecan pie from his mother, awkward in my office that felt too tidy for him. "You'd hate my garage," he said, smiling. Before he left, he knocked twice on the jamb. Superstition, respect, both. I stopped by my mother's grave before shipping out again. The grass had healed, even where grief had scuffed it raw. I pressed my palm to the stone. "We're learning," I whispered. Slow, but in the right direction. The wind moved through the oaks with the patience of old women quilting. I took it as an answer. Not long after, a letter arrived from my father. His handwriting precise as ever. Inside was a clipping from the local paper, no photo, just a line about the reunion. The community stood to honor service. Underneath, 5 words in his hand, "I should have stood sooner." I pinned it beside a county map that didn't need mapping. Not as proof, not as apology, but as a marker. Even stone can shift. The nickname still floats rooms before I enter. Night Weaver. Some whisper it with awe, some with skepticism. I don't use it myself, it's just a handle. What matters is what you lift with it. And if you'd been in that VFW hall, you'd remember the sound, the bleachers sighing when men and women found their feet, the hush when silence finally voted different. Not applause, better. The sound of a community editing itself toward courage. That's what I carry. Not medals, not clippings. The sound of oak and aluminum and human spines remembering how to straighten. Family isn't always blood. Sometimes it's the ones who knock twice before stepping out, the ones who ask, "How's your air?" and wait for the real answer. Blood can wound, honor refuses to. That night in Harvest Ridge, honor stood. My father couldn't not yet, but the room did, and sometimes that's enough beginning for one life. So if you hear the name Night Weaver, don't picture a legend. Picture a map spread on a table, lines drawn to catch what runs, rituals carved out of grief and mercy. A room that stood taller because truth finally spoke, because respect isn't inherited, it's earned. And when it arrives, you can hear it settle. When a room decides to stand taller, it's never just for one person. It's a reminder that courage is contagious and respect is something we all build together. If this story stayed with you, if it reminded you of someone who lifted you when others tried to break you, share it. Let your words be the weight someone else can lean on. Hit like if you felt the hum of truth in this room. Comment with your own moment of standing tall so others can borrow your courage. Share this video with a friend who needs to hear it. And if you want more stories that carry weight without shouting, make sure to subscribe. Because the more of us who rise, the taller these rooms get.